from the 1970s to the present, the American economy has been going through a dramatic transformation that is going to transform American life. In the 1970s, corporate restructuring had led to a significant growth in the economy, but a really, really unequal growth, and will be a major factor in the massive growth of the 1990s. Investment in new technologies, really centering around computer technologies and their offspring, will drive economic growth for decades. But we'll also see corporations merge into larger and larger corporate entities and dramatic increases in efficiency. But American labor costs are among the highest in the world because of all the benefits, retirements, healthcare plans, things that American workers require, plus the fact that American workers demand higher wages. And so this is going to lead to the offshoring of jobs, and it's going to lead to a real battle between unions who are trying to demand higher compensation and standards for workers and corporations who are increasingly tempted to go employ workers in parts of the world where they don't have to pay them hardly anything and they don't have to provide any sort of benefits or protections for them. We also see this happening within the country as jobs flee states where unionization is strong, like the Midwest, and head down to states where unionization is relatively weaker, and so therefore the standards of what workers get is weaker in the American South. We look at these graphs, this kind of tells a lot of this story. The green line over here on the top graph on the left is productivity. How much we're actually producing in the manufacturing sector, where the blue line is the number of manufacturing jobs. So you see, as we become more and more productive, increased efficiency, there are fewer and fewer jobs available. If you look diagonal to that on the bottom right, you see the transitioning of the economy from manufacturing jobs, which is the red line, to service jobs, which is the purple line there on top. On the bottom left here, you see the states that are most affected by the loss of American manufacturing. The darker red, the more affected those states are. Oops, there we go. The biggest growth sector is the technology sector. Computers, cell phones, later the internet, MP3 technology, digital video, all these things are going to become an increasingly important part of the American economy. There you see the evolution of the cell phone. That's fun. And keep an eye on that Altair 8800 computer up there at the top. That's going to play a big role in our story going forward. The stock market is going to do very well over this period. The NASDAQ, which is kind of a secondary stock market, kind of a second-tier stock market, second to the New York Stock Exchange, will particularly grow because that's where a lot of these technology startups come along and list themselves. GDP will jump from 2.7 trillion in 1980 to 9.8 trillion by 2000. This is just a huge growth in GDP. Inflation during this time never breaks 3%. Typically during times of rapid economic growth, you see inflation. But through monetary policies targeted at keeping inflation down, inflation remains very low. By the late 1980s, even in a time of extreme economic growth, inflation is under 2%. The Dow Jones average, which is the more traditional stock market, jumps from 1,000 in 1980 to 14,000 in 1999. It's the longest sustained economic growth in American history. But by April of 2001, trouble begins to appear. The dot-com bubble burst. There had been a lot of capital invested into startup internet companies. And as people begin to realize that most of these will never make money, they begin to pull their money out. And we have a stock market crash based on this. Stocks actually slip over the period of a year. And by late 2001, the economy has moved back into a recession after 7 years of extraordinary growth. Growth will be slow throughout the Bush administration from 2002 to 2008. Even when there is growth, it's very modest growth. And of course, at the end of 2008, we're going to see one of the biggest economic collapses in American history. During this time, America as a whole got richer, but virtually all of those gains went to the richest Americans. We had a two-tiered economy. For Americans in the bottom half, or really the bottom 90% or so, they see their wages barely increase over this time. From 1980, but those in the top see their earnings go up dramatically. From 1980 to 2000, the top 20% of Americans economically will see their income grow 20% by about $100,000 on average. The bottom 60% see virtually no growth at all. And so as the economy grows, that ends up in the hands of a very small number of people. Well, why did this happen? Well, one reason is the rising price of raw materials. Another reason is foreign competition, where a lot of jobs and the manufacturing stuff goes offshore, so the workers here are not making that sort of money, offshoring of jobs. The decline of unions weakens wages as well as working conditions. And we also, really beginning with Reagan, began to structure a tax code where the more you make, the less you pay as a percentage of your income. And the way they do this is you create a separate taxation system for money made off of investments, and that rate is called the capital gains rate, is only 15%. And since rich people tend to make most of their money off of investments, they're paying only 15% on their income, while other Americans are paying in the high 20% up into the mid 30% on their income. The second thing you do is you switch tax revenues over from being mainly based on income taxes to being mainly based on payroll taxes, so they come out as a percent of your paycheck. Well, the wealthiest people in America don't get paychecks. They make money off of investments, and so they don't pay these payroll taxes. And you see here in the bottom right a chart showing the transition from corporate taxes, which are declining through the period, and an increase in payroll taxes, which of course are increasing during the period. But what this leads to is an increasing poverty rate and a widening gap between the wealthiest people in the country and everybody else. Since World War II, actually, poverty had been declining dramatically, particularly during the 60s, during LBJ's War on Poverty. Rates that had consistently been over 20% are down to 12%, poverty rates, that is, by the 1970s. But by the 1980s, with Reagan's policies, these began to creep back up above 15%. They dropped a little bit under Clinton, but by 2012, they're back up above 15%.